Hello everyone, and welcome to another video of reading horror stories. Today, I will be making up stories that will send shivers down your spine and make you wish that you weren't home alone. With that being said, let's begin. Two girls are walking along a river, the sun beating down on their tiring bodies. They had been lost in the forest for a few days now, and were trying desperately to find a way out. They had located this river one day, and using common sense decided to follow it. Water eventually drained into somewhere, right? The leaves were falling down, creating the sun to peek through the trees and brightening up the floor. One of the girls, 17-year-old Stacy Okrop, said, "We should take a break." The other girl, 18-year-old Mira Corey, replied with, "Yes, good idea." The two girls sat down in the shade, both sighing. Then Stacy saw something. Rising from the river water was a deformed creature. Water dripped from its bluish, torn skin, giant black eyes watching them. Nubs were on its back, and when it stood up on two short legs, she could see small hands poking out from each shoulder blade. The arms were long, with elongated, curved fingers. Bones were poking out of each fingertip. There was no teeth in its mouth. Fresh cuts were deep in its face and body. Parts of its body was falling off. "What?" Stacy stammered, fear taking over. Mira looked at her, and then at the river, gasping, and both girls saw another creature crawl out of the river. The first creature stumbled forward, and she could hear bones cracking with every step. But the thing didn't scream. Eventually, 3 or 4 more things crawled out of the river, bones splinting out of their bodies. The two girls ran. Luckily, the things couldn't keep up. However, they stopped when they saw a lake. They hadn't seen this before. There was an old factory falling apart, and it looked like there was explosions all around. A plaque stood before them, reading, "Site of nuclear explosions keep clear." "Wait, do you think those things back there were people affected by radiation?" Mira asked her friend, and Stacy glanced back uncertainly. "Maybe. We should probably get out of here before we get affected too." They didn't pay attention to the fact that radiation was all in the ground too. They headed in another direction, making sure those creatures did not see them. However, it wouldn't appear to be the issue. Eventually, Mira started to feel odd. Her mouth started to fill with blood, and her lungs collapsed. Her legs buckled, and she died choking on her own blood. Stacy tried her best to help her friend, but she started to get symptoms of unseen energy poisoning her blood. Stacy's eyes started to swell. Her heart beat faster and faster until it stopped suddenly. Her heart had failed, and she fell to the ground as her friend had before. Radiation had killed them both, as they were at the area where the most radiation was in the ground and in the trees and leaves. The things were indeed people. People who had survived the explosions but had been poisoned by the radiation. They had been half dead, their bodies slowly dying. The water for them was the only way to somewhat slow the radiation from killing all their cells. No one ever found the two girls' bodies, and their families never found out what happened to their daughters. A young man was walking home from his college classes one night, the crisp winter air whipping at his face. Rain fell, clouding his vision. He shook his head, shaking off the water. Just then, he saw a pair of headlights fast approaching him. He stepped to the side to allow them to pass, but instead of driving past him, the car stopped beside the soaking man. A pair of attractive girls sat inside the car, smiling at him. "Hey, hun, Need a ride? One asked, offering in a sweet voice. He couldn't pass this opportunity up, so he graciously thanked them and got in. They drove away, the rain pelting on the windshield. Only then did he notice the smell of marijuana in the car. The stench was surrounding the two girls. They were high, he realized with a sinking feeling. And this became obvious as the driver was nowhere near to driving straight. He could see a large pole sticking up from the ground on the side of the road, and they were driving straight towards it. His heart stopped a beat as he realized that the driver hadn't yet noticed, looking at her friend and laughing. "Look out!" he shouted. But the driver had a delayed reaction to his words, and by the time she looked in front, it was only a split second before the car was smashed into the pole, killing all three instantly. The strange thing was that the pole had not been there earlier that day. I have a dog. Her name is Darcy. She and I would constantly go to a river that we used to swim at, until a horrifying experience happened that created a feeling of dread whenever I would even see a picture of a river. The sun had just begun to rise. The morning air is still cool. We walked until we reached the spot where we would stop and get ready for a swim. However, I stopped abruptly when I saw a person standing downstream, and it looked like they were hurting someone, or even worse. Darcy began to bark, an aggressive bark that almost said, "Stop that at once!" My heart started beating a million times a second. It felt like when the person turned around, standing up and throwing the body of a man into the water. They had a knife in their hand. Crimson liquid dripped from the blade. They quickly pulled out a gun, aiming at us. Luckily, we were close to the trees, and they blocked the bullets from hitting us. However, I didn't stop to see if he would be able to hit us. Wasn't exactly looking to be a target for this crazy, deranged person. Anyways, Darcy and I sprinted into the deeper part of the forest, hearing the gun firing behind us. I pulled out my phone and called the police, telling them I was being attacked. I told them where I was before one of the bullets got me. It dug deep into my shoulder. It hurt like hell, and my ears were ringing, but there was no way I was going to stop. However, since I had asthma, I had to stop, gasping for any breath that I could get. I had forgotten my inhaler, I realized at the front door when we left. Oh, God, why was I such an idiot? Darcy was barking at the forest, and as I was trying my best to not pass out from a mix of lack of oxygen and pain, I could see an outline of a person running towards us. They stopped about 10 meters from us, and I could now see that the attacker was a male. He aimed his gun at me, aiming to kill. He pressed the trigger, and I flinched. However, it seemed he was out of bullets. So he quickly put his gun away and sprinted towards us with his knife ready. I realized that I hadn't hung up with the call to the police, and I gasped out that he was coming. The person on the other end said that the police were almost there, but I didn't hear it as my ears were still ringing. I didn't yet have my breath back, but I tried my best to stand up, almost blacking out. I knew I couldn't run. I would definitely pass out. So I got prepared to fight this insane man. I knew he was capable of murder, but I couldn't think about that. I had to fight as best I could. He swung a fist at my face, and I managed to dodge. His knife, however, I couldn't dodge. It plunged into my ribs, and shooting pain shot through my body. Darcy leapt forward, snapping at his arm. She ripped into his flesh, and he screamed in pain. The blade was still stuck in my side, but I knew better than to pull it out. Darcy was still tearing his arm, and I heard a loud snap. He cried out in excruciating pain, trying his best to distance himself from the dog. I forgot to mention that Darcy is a Rottweiler, so she isn't a small dog at all. There was nothing he could do against her, but I had to pull her off before she hurt him anymore. He was still on the ground, growling in pain and glaring daggers, pun definitely intended, at me and my dog. He stood up and tried to lunge at me, but he stopped. I didn't hear the police arrive, but they were here. They quickly restrained the man, but suddenly my body gave out, and I guess I passed out because I don't remember them carrying me out of the forest. I woke up when I was on the stretcher being put in the ambulance. The 911 operator must have realized I had been shot during the call. I guess my body was in shock because I passed out again. I woke up in the hospital. Cliche, I know. The blade now out of me. I had surgeries for my side and shoulder. I told the police everything, and luckily the man was taken to jail for the murder. I'm all healed up now, but PTSD is a real bitch. That's all for today's video. I hope that you found these stories spooky and creepy. If you want to use my stories in any way, make sure to credit me, Autumn River, as the author and owner of these stories. All these stories are fictional. The characters are all made up. With that being said, make sure to stay safe out there. Who knows what could be lurking around the corner of a dark alley.